Today is June 8th. It's the 159th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. On this day in 2009, two American journalists, Yuna Lee and Laura Ling, are found guilty of illegally entering North Korea and sentenced to 12 years of hard labor in a North Korean penal camp. Korean-American Yuna Lee and Chinese-American Laura Ling are reporting a story on human trafficking between North Korea and China for Current TV, the now-defunct cable channel founded by former Vice President Al Gore. 3 months earlier, in March of 2009, the story takes Lee and Ling to the Chinese-North Korean border on the Tumen River. Their guide leads them out onto the ice-covered river. They walk across, unsure of where exactly the border is. As they near the North Korean riverbank, their guide points out a shack where North Koreans wait before being smuggled across to China. Rather than proceeding further into North Korea, though, Lee and Ling decide they better turn around and head back to China. Halfway across the river, they hear shouts and turn to see armed North Korean border guards pursuing them across the ice. The two journalists run. They later write of that moment, quote, "We were firmly back inside China when the soldiers apprehended us. We tried with all our might to cling to bushes, ground, anything that would keep us on Chinese soil. But we were no match for the determined soldiers. They violently dragged us back across the ice to North Korea and marched us to a nearby army base where they detained us." 3 months later, in early June, they're put on trial for illegally entering the DPRK, North Korea. According to a report by KCNA, the North Korean state news agency, the two Americans unlawfully entered North Korea in order to produce a documentary slandering the DPRK. On this day in 2009, Yuna Lee and Laura Ling are convicted and sentenced to 12 years of hard labor in a prison camp. Following their sentencing, they're not immediately sent to prison, but are held at a guest house. They're allowed weekly calls home to speak to their families, and in one of those calls, they let their families know that the North Koreans have made it clear to them that if former U.S. President Bill Clinton comes to North Korea, the journalists will be freed. It's the North Koreans' great desire to have an American president come to North Korea, and the capture of these two journalists provides them with a golden opportunity to fulfill this dream. Over the next few months, secret plans are made behind the scenes to effect the journalists' release by any other means, but in the end, President Obama requests that President Clinton make the trip as special envoy. 2 months after Ling and Lee are sentenced to 12 years hard labor on this day in 2009, Clinton travels to North Korea and meets with the dear leader Kim Jong-il. They meet for a little over an hour. Clinton poses for photographs with Kim. The KCNA reports that Clinton apologizes for the two journalists' grave crime against the DPRK. However, his wife, Secretary of State Clinton, denies any apology is offered. Apology or not, it's a great coup for Kim. The North Korean propaganda machine gets to boast that a high-profile American leader, a representative of their arch-enemies, has come to meet with their dear leader Kim Jong-il. The following day, dear leader Kim pardons the two journalists and releases them from North Korean custody. George Orwell's novel 1984 is published on this day in 1949. The story of 1984 is set in a technologically advanced dystopian future, where fear is used to manipulate and suppress individuals who do not conform to the prevailing political ideology of English socialism, or INGSOC, which is controlled by the inner party, the ruling elite, who are the privileged 2% of the population. The story takes place in Airstrip 1, formerly London and now the capital of the utopian superstate Oceania. It's a place where people have no control over their own lives. They live miserable, repressed lives. The the cost of trying to create a perfect society. Orwell writes 1984 in the late 1940s, in the years immediately following World War II, and at the outset of the Cold War as the Iron Curtain begins to descend across much of Europe. Following the Second World War, the big three Allied leaders, the US, the UK, and the USSR, establish their respective control over the world, primarily dividing up zones of influence in Europe, but also in the Middle East and the Far East, the future battlegrounds for the proxy wars the superpowers fight in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and the divided Germany. Likewise, the setting for Orwell's 1984 is a world comprised of three superstates engaged in perpetual war: Oceania, the former Great Britain; Eurasia, the USSR; and Eastasia, Eastern and Southeast Asia. Orwell's superstate, Oceania, is a composite of the totalitarian states of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, with elements borrowed from both ends of the political spectrum. And Oceania is ruled by Big Brother, the party leader who is modeled on both Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Orwell writes 1984 as a warning, painting the picture of a future that he believes should never come to pass. And he paints such a distinct and vivid image of this world that we now use the adjective Orwellian to describe surveillance societies, misinformation and propaganda campaigns, revisionist history, and official government deceptions. George Orwell's 1984, published on this day in 1949, presents a vision of a future that is very different from what we've come to know. Sort of. Everywhere citizens go in Airstrip 1, they encounter telescreens, TV screens in all public and private areas that not only broadcast government propaganda and approved entertainment, but at the same time also monitor the users and the populace. Kind of like the surveillance society we live in today with Google and Facebook tracking our every keystroke and feeding us advertising tailored to our searches. There's the novel's fictional language, newspeak, which is controlled language as a means of limiting freedom of thought, which you could say is kind of like today's political correctness and college campus speech codes. And then there's Big Brother, kind of like today's NSA, secretly tracking and monitoring internet traffic, collecting email and cell phone data. Or is today's Big Brother our willingness to put our lives online for everyone to see, opting into our mobile device's location services setting, creating a new login for every website we visit? Is Big Brother some government agency, the alphabet agencies of TSA, SEC, DEA, SSA, FBI? Or is Big Brother the Internet of Things? Not the alphabet agencies, but Alphabet, the new parent company of Google, the corporate cloud that holds our family photos, our family trees, our street views, our Zestimates, our DNA profiles, our Facebook profiles, our Google Wallet, our Android Pay, our favorites, our likes, the collective sharing of our private lives. Today's Big Brother is not just some faceless government entity. Big Brother is us. There are 206 days left in the year.